Good morning or afternoon, everyone, wherever you are tuning in from. It's wonderful to have you all here today for our webinar, The Construction Logistics Cyclist Safety, or CLOCS. This webinar is proudly brought to you by the National Road Safety Partnership Program, or NRSPP, in partnership with ARB Group and, of course, Transport for London. My name is Rosemary Pedestrian and I will co-moderate this session and provide tech support if required. My esteemed colleague, Jerome, who manages the NRSPP and its many activities, joins me in the studio as our primary moderator today. Welcome, Jerome.
Thank you very much, Rosemary.
And Jerome, for anyone joining us for the first time, could you tell us a little bit more about the NRSPP and its purpose?
Thank you very much, Rosemary. The NRSPP has been established to provide a collaborative network for Australian businesses and organisations to help them create a positive road safety culture, both internally and externally. It aims to help organisations of all sizes, across all sectors, to share and build road safety initiatives specific to their own workplace and beyond. It is delivered by ARB and funded primarily by a government coalition ARB group and led by an industry steering group. So for more information and more tools like this webinar, please refer to the NRSP website. And I think one of the best things about today is we get to draw in some information from the other side of the globe and hear about good practice in workplace road safety around heavy vehicles. So looking forward to it.
Awesome. And thank you, Jerome. We'd like to make our audience aware that, as always, we are recording today's session and we'll be sure to share the footage with you on conclusion of the webinar. Webinars work best when they're interactive, so please type your questions into the chat box and we'll address them along the way. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome our two presenters who are talking to us from London, Hannah White and Vicky Sims. Hannah is a project manager at Transport for London, responsible for freight-related safety projects. She has over 9 years' experience in delivering a wide range of transport policies, programs and projects in the capital. She currently manages the Construction Logistics and Cyclist Safety CLOCS project and also Transport for London's Safer Trucks program to improve the design of heavy goods vehicles. Vicky is a project officer in Transport for London's freight and fleet team with over 9 years' experience working in the freight industry, both private and public sector. Vicky has worked on the CLOCS program since 2013, helping deliver the key program outputs, communications and stakeholder relationships. Hannah and Vicky, over to you now, and we can't wait to hear more about what you're going to tell us today.
Hello, and thank you very much for inviting us to present on the Construction Logistics and Cyclist Safety projects. We're really pleased to be here, and we hope it's going to be of interest to everybody. I'm joined by Vicky, and we're going to do take it in turns to take you through the story of CLOCS, and there'll be time for questions as we go through the presentation. Please see the agenda for today, which will take 40 minutes or so, plus we have got 20 minutes there for questions. I'll first introduce a little bit about Transport for London and ourselves, before really moving on to the challenge that we've had here around work-related road safety and incidents involving vulnerable road users. A bit more information about understanding the issues and the evidence that we have collected and research commissioned so that we make sure that the solutions we've developed have been fit for purpose. Talk about CLOCS as one of the solutions to the issues we've got here, and a little bit then about what CLOCS has achieved and what we've got in terms of vision for the future. So to start a little bit about Transport for London. This is the strategic transport authority for the capital here in the UK. We're responsible to the Mayor of London, and we run all of the public transport services, the underground, trams, buses, river services, and we're also responsible for licensing and regulating taxi services, as well as planning for sustainable transport such as cycling and increasing and improving walking environments. But we also have a team that's responsible for mitigating the impact of the movement of stuff rather than the movement of people, and that's the freight and fleet team in which both Vicky and I work. I've been in this team for 3 years, and previously I worked in a cycling team planning policy and cycle safety schemes, and now spent 3 years working with the freight and commercial vehicle sector. And I'll let Vicky just say hello now as well.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Vicky. I've worked on the freight and fleet team since December, but before that I worked with the team in my role as a consultant. I've worked on the CLOCS programme since it started, and I support Hannah on a number of other projects in the safety and environment team as well.
Just moving on now a little bit to the challenge that we've been facing here in London. I'm going to provide you a little bit of context about the growth that we're experiencing here. So the current population of London is about 8.7 million, and we're expecting that to grow by a further 1.7 million by 2030. Apologise if we've been misinformed at all, but we understand that parts of Australia, in particular Melbourne, is seeing a huge amount of growth as well. So I'm sure there's some parallels here with the challenges that we're facing. At the same time this is happening, we're also trying to create a more livable city. We've got more people, we're going to have more pressure, but we continually want to support the economic development and growth and enhance the quality of life for residents now and our visitors. And we need to do this while we continually improve the safety and security of those residents and visitors and make this a sustainable working city and a place where people want to live. Now, all of this has to be balanced by allowing those people, but also the goods and services that they demand, to move easily, safely and friendly within the capital. So we have got a lot of completing demands here that a lot of the team that I work in are responsible for from the commercial vehicle side. Clearly, all this growth brings with it additional demand for homes, workplaces and recreation spaces, and the scale of construction activity that's currently ongoing in London is quite apparent on this slide, and this brings with it a huge amount of construction traffic. So that's over 500,000 lorry miles per day in London, and construction traffic specifically, types of vehicles that you're seeing there in that picture, make up a third of all of the daytime heavy goods vehicle traffic that we have in London. We've also got a new mayor since May who has a very strong commitment to building affordable housing in London. So Transport for London and the Mayor of London's own remit is going to lead to a huge increase in construction traffic as well. So we really must be managing that as we're moving forward. This brings us on to more specifically the challenge that CLOCS is here to address. Sharing the roads brings with it some very tragic consequences, and we have seen last year 78% of all cyclist fatalities involving a heavy goods vehicle and 20% of pedestrian fatalities involving a heavy goods vehicle. And when we consider that they make up only 4% of the road miles driven in London, it's something we really need to look at and address specifically. Bit of background to this project we're going to talk to you about, and this really started in 2011 where 16 cyclists were tragically killed in 1 year. 9 of those were by heavy goods vehicles, and when we looked into those the types of vehicles that were involved, 7 were specifically from the construction industry. So that's your tipper trucks, your mixer trucks, skip and waste vehicles. And the Mayor of London actually visited the widow of one of those cyclists and really acknowledged the fact that construction was overrepresented here and promised to look into that industry to understand why, and then therefore be able to understand what we could do to address this and reduce those and eradicate those collisions in the future.
So we basically established that there was an issue, as Hannah's outlined, and more importantly, I suppose, the potential for this issue to become even greater as construction activity increases and the population grows. But before we could really take action, we realised that we first really needed to sort of understand the causes of these collisions and incidents, get the background behind these incidents. So back in 2012, we commissioned a review of the construction sector's transport activities to really better understand the causes. We got Transport Research Laboratory, or TRL, on board to carry out an independent review, and they produced the Construction Logistics and Cyclist Safety Report, which is really where CLOCS was born. So the report identified a number of really quite stark findings. It demonstrated to us that the established culture of health and safety that we see in the workplace, particularly on construction sites, doesn't go beyond the site gate. It really doesn't translate across to road risk and road safety. And there's a lack of awareness and therefore ownership of road risk in the construction industry. it showed us that the blind spots around construction vehicles can be up to 50% greater than blind spots on other delivery vehicles. So that's the area that the driver actually can't directly see, and it can be much larger on construction type vehicles such as tippers and cement mixers. It also confirmed what we sort of already knew, that of the incidents involving vulnerable road users and HGVs, a really disproportionate number of those involved were construction type vehicles. Additionally, it also highlighted that data around these incidents on the road really wasn't there. It was sort of a lacking set of data compared to the amount of data collected on on-site incidents. So it basically identified systemic failings in the way that work-related road safety is considered and managed in the construction industry. So having identified some of the problems, TRL also put forward a series of recommendations to address them. These included the creation of a nationally recognised standard on work-related road risk, something consistent that the industry could really collectively commit to and work towards. It recommended that the health and safety executives, that's the government body responsible for regulation and enforcement of workplace health and safety in the UK, it recommended that they should extend their reporting to include work-related on-road collisions. It suggested that the actual design and manufacturing of construction vehicles should be looked at and improved through collaboration, directly working with the vehicle manufacturers. And hand in hand with that recommendation was the need to actually better understand those blind spots and exactly why they're so much larger on construction vehicles. One of the key recommendations of the report was the call for stakeholders from right across the industry to take ownership and actually address the issues directly. So that's a little bit of background on the challenge and the research that we did. It's just an opportunity for any questions if you have them now.
Certainly, we got a really good question that's come through from Blair. Thank you, fantastic presentation so far. Thank you to both presenters for getting up so early. We don't have the figures here regarding the construction vehicles, but we do know in Melbourne that half of all heavy goods vehicles deaths involve vulnerable road users. This includes cyclists, pedestrians, and also motorcyclists. Have you seen this regards to the motorcycle issue in London?
We have got a specific issue with motorcyclists in terms of the relative risk. They are one of the most vulnerable road user groups we have here. However, analysis of the figures, whilst sometimes they do involve heavy goods vehicles, the contributory factors tend to be related more to speed than they do to some of the issues with cyclists and pedestrians, which tend to be around the blind spots. So there's a different set of initiatives to tackle motorcyclists incidents, but yes, we do have an issue with that vulnerable road user group.
Another question here. You mentioned earlier about the Mayor getting involved in the very early stages and going out and visiting one of the widows.
Mm-hmm.
Was that the catalyst? Was that the key point that took it off, and that leadership from the beginning? Is that where it all began, or?
It had been rising up on the agenda because of pressure from the cycling lobby groups for some years. So we launched a cycle safety action plan back in 2010, which is when, because during 2008, 2009 there were also issues, but it really came to a head in 2011 because of the amount of activity when we were building the Olympic Park for 2012, those games, but it was that political drive that really led to this project, because we had such high level support. So whilst the lobby group's been asking for a long time, it wasn't really until the Mayor stepped in that we had such a strong mandate to take this forward.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Let's move on then. Thanks.
Okay, so having commissioned the CLOCS research, we really needed to ensure that those findings and recommendations that had been presented to us were actually taken forward, picked up and turned into some positive action. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the approach that we took as Transport for London to take CLOCS from just a research report and turn it into a full programme of activity. And then Hannah's going to just talk through some of that activity and the key delivery areas. So following the publication of the research, the Commissioner of Transport for London, who's our most senior representative, he personally wrote to other senior representatives within the construction industry, so fleet operators, property developers, contractors and vehicle manufacturers, to really communicate the findings of the report and actually ask them to respond with an action plan, so a process of addressing those findings and recommendations. So this senior level call to action really demonstrated our commitment to addressing the issue and was instrumental in gaining that buy-in at an influential level across the industry. So we really wanted to reach the decision makers in those organisations. And we invited these individuals and their colleagues to a launch event of sorts. So that's the inaugural CLOCS event. We've had several since, which we're going to discuss a little bit later. But the aim of that event was really to cement their commitment and I suppose get them all in one room together as well. And bearing in mind the recommendation that stakeholders from across the industry take ownership of the issues, we really wanted to facilitate this industry-led approach and set up some working groups to progress the recommendations and collaboratively develop the detail of the CLOCS programme. So this slide really shows us a range and breadth of the stakeholders that have been engaged right from the start, from right across industry. So we've got the contractors, the clients, regulatory bodies such as police and ourselves, logistics operators, vehicle manufacturers, and those that we've termed as communicators. So that might include trade associations, charities, representative bodies. And really unique to CLOCS is the way that all of these organisations have worked together, often with their competitors, really for the greater good. And we've really seen industry pick up and take ownership of the programme. And our role has really been to just facilitate rather than sort of dictate to the industry.
So moving on then, taking forward that in a more structured way, CLOCS for the last 3 years, that's how long it's been running now, since that inaugural CLOCS event, has been managed by working groups, of which there are about 60 industry representatives that meet every 2 to 3 months in a large forum where we provide updates on the programme. There's external presentations, there's discussion and debate, and it's an opportunity to bring to the table further issues that may be arising so we can collectively decide what sort of action should be taken. And that action normally takes place through a task and finish group. So a smaller group will then meet and they will take forward various things that people have suggested need to happen. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about the types of products and outputs that the project has had. But I think the key thing that's been very important about the working groups is they have been lively, to say the least, and that's something we have embraced. There's been a lot of debate, a lot of, what has the cycling community been doing, or should this be up to us to do it? And I think it's always better that these views are aired and discussed and action taken where required, and where it's not appropriate, an explanation given, and we can then prioritise the work. But we need to have develop solutions that industry can practically take forward but are also going to address the issue, and that's why it's been really important we've had action by the industry and ownership, which we've achieved so far quite well, I think, through that working group model. That model also led us to really developing a structured programme for the CLOCS work streams. So Vicky's mentioned the research and the recommendations that came from that, but by using industry's views, we were able to structure this into something that we knew industry could take forward. So for example, that recommendation for the Health and Safety Executive government body to extend reporting to road incidents, that was not something that government body was going to do, even though we asked them. So the question is, right, what can industry do to try and address that instead? And that's really where these work streams came from, was input about what could practically happen. These are structured around the themes from the research. So work stream 1 is all around improving vehicle safety through manufacture and design to address that blind spot issue. Workstream 2 is all about addressing that safety imbalance between on-site health and safety cultures and work-related road safety health and safety cultures, which, as Vicky's already mentioned, there was an imbalance of, as was found in that research. And then work stream 3 has been all about encouraging best practice in the construction logistics industry. So what is the right thing to do, and developing a common standard that everybody could sign up to. Because one of the key things that had been established was there were a lot of people who wanted to tackle this, but they weren't quite sure how to do it, and how to do it in a fair way across a supply chain as well. So a little bit more about those work streams. I'm just going to take you through each of them and some of the kind of key objectives and what we've achieved so far. So to start with the vehicle, the blind spot on construction and other heavy goods vehicles is one of the major contributory factors in the police investigation. And there's an image at the bottom of the slide here which was modelled by Loughborough University on our behalf as part of research into blind spots. And none of those cyclists are directly visible through the windows to the driver of that cab. And that is really quite a shocking image, we think, and really quite a design flaw of a vehicle, that in order to be able to see that around the vehicle you actually need to have 6 mirrors fitted, and we still feel that drivers still feel that a camera or a sensor system is required to alert them to a presence of a vulnerable road user in close proximity. 3 windows, 6 mirrors, a camera and a sensor is 10 things for a driver to take in. It takes many seconds to absorb all of that information, whilst you're possibly under pressure and working in quite a complex urban environment. So we really think that's a design flaw and a risk of driver cognitive overload, which we have that concept as well. And really we want manufacturers to change the design of vehicles to reduce those types of blind spots. However, we've had to take recognition that the existing fleet is around for some time, so where we are retrofitting kits such as cameras and sensors, we have done quite a lot of work to make sure that they are the right things that are going to be helpful for drivers and operators, and also developed an independent test protocol to make sure that those things actually do the job they say they're going to do, and to make sure that they are going to achieve a reduction in collisions. However, looking forward, we really want to look at improving vehicle design, and when we first spoke to the vehicle manufacturers, their main response was that they really only listened to regulation, and that was what governed design. However, with a little bit more research, we found that there were already some solutions there. So, for example, there is a cab, Mercedes there in the red, which is used in the refuse sector, which has excellent direct vision. Could that not be used for the construction sector, and could we not see that with a tipper or a mixer body? So we formed an operator delegation, the customers of the vehicle manufacturers, who went to visit them one by one and really laid down a challenge to say, if you produce a vehicle fit for an urban environment, we will buy them. And that really did start stimulating some change, and within 18 months we had, well, I say prototype, but actually vehicles that could be used from 6 of the principal vehicle manufacturers, and they are now being purchased, bought and operated in London. Finally, we also, on this, I've got a work stream here really looking to the long-term view, taking on board the fact that vehicle design is governed by European regulation, and we have a programme of lobbying activity. In fact, I'm in Brussels twice next week in meetings to discuss those regulations, present our research, our findings and the business case for change, and to look to have that regulation change to ensure that there is improved safety around the design of heavy goods vehicles in this area. A little bit more then about work stream 2, about addressing the safety imbalance. This has been the most challenging because we're talking about addressing an entire culture here, and it's all very embedded at that. And then creating a cultural shift is not easy, but a key thing that CLOCS has done is really shown the extent of what this safety imbalance is, and drawn parallels to how well health and safety can be managed in other sectors, so that we can look at what lessons can be learned. So if I just take you through this slide here, we have on the left-hand side, we have one of the key findings here is that the area of greatest risk is really driving. So 1,700 fatalities a year in Great Britain. About a third of those occur in the course of work. We think it could possibly be more, but a third is what the research has demonstrated to us. The body that governs and looks into investigations that occur on the railways. We have one for aviation, we have one for maritime, and as Vicky mentioned earlier, we also have the Health and Safety Executive for work-related incidents in the workplace. But other than the police, who are predominantly looking for criminal activity, we don't have a body that looks at work-related road risk in that way, and that is something that we have been kind of calling for as part of this project. However, that doesn't mean that we can't work with an industry and to do something voluntarily about this, and that's really what CLOCS is doing, is trying to get those established health and safety cultures for managing safety on a construction site and applying them to the management of road safety within their supply chains. So this work stream really has been about increasing the transparency of what's happening in order to be able to take further action. And then one thing I will say about this that became very apparent is when you talk to health and safety professionals about this issue, they are very passionate about doing something about it. And when you expose this to them as being a real gap, we've seen a huge amount of will and personal commitment to tackle this imbalance. Finally, a little bit then about work stream 3 around creating a common standard and framework in order to be able to manage this issue. And one of the key recommendations that Vicky mentioned was around having a common standard that came out of the research. And what we looked at the time was in 2013 there were 11 standards, codes of practice and guides by the sorts of organisations up on the slide there, all trying to manage, but all doing so in a slightly different way. You know, do driver training, but do this kind of driver training, fit this equipment, but fit this type of equipment. And this was becoming very difficult for industry to be able to make the case for investment in order to be able to tackle the issue. And we actually saw quite a lot of people being resistant to doing so until they were sure there was one common standard. I think had CLOCS not come around, we could have been faced with how many more standards for managing work-related road safety. So what we did was we sat the owners of those different standards around the table, and we really kind of worked through exactly what best practice was, what that looked like, what lessons had been learned from the ones that have been existed so far, and produced one single common standard for managing work-related road risk. And it's something that industry wants. About 85% of them want one. We're not sure who the others are. We think they're probably people with competing standards, but it is generally something that's been very well received by operators in particular, who have to make quite a lot of investment in the things within that standard. Just to take you through briefly then around what it contained, it was informed by the working groups to make sure that it was something that was fit for purpose, and it includes 16 requirements, all aimed at reducing a collision between a heavy goods vehicle and a vulnerable road user. Whilst the project is called CLOCS, it is about all vulnerable road users, and all these requirements are also as fitting for pedestrians and potentially some of those motorcycle incidents as well. It includes requirements for the operators around being a quality operator and managing their collisions. It includes requirements around vehicles to tackle those blind spots and also to warn vulnerable road users about risky manoeuvres, such as a sticker saying where there's a blind spot and a left turn audible alarm. It includes driver training requirements in vulnerable road user safety, which includes a driver spending half a day on a bike to understand what it's actually like to be vulnerable and see it from someone else's point of view. And finally, really important here was, for the first time, the standard included requirements for the construction client. So those people employing the vehicle operators, this standard actually gave them a whole set of responsibilities around how they manage their logistics activity. Site access and egress, the loading, the unloading, the routing, moving things out of peak hours, for example, and really importantly, checking compliance with that CLOCS standard throughout their supply chain. We also, through those task and finish groups, have developed supplementary guidance and tools to help people implement the requirements in the standard. Some of these are paper-based and some of these are actually online tools. For example, for collision reporting and management, we have a database and a system where people can put lessons learned about collisions when they investigate them, which people can use. And this has really been something that we continually review every couple of years to make sure it's fit for purpose and up to date with best practice. Before we move on to the next section about and chance for questions, I really want to talk through a section about a key learning and focus that we've had from CLOCS. Prior to this programme, a lot of the work Transport for London did was very much focused on the operator and just working with those that manage the vehicles. However, really where the key lever in all of this is working with those people that employ those vehicle operators, and if we want to see that cultural shift, we need to see them take ownership of the impact of the activity that they are commissioning. So this pyramid here really is kind of showing very simply where some of that kind of power and influence lies. So right at the top there, the clients, including government bodies like ourselves, who commission massive infrastructure projects and civil engineering projects. Then we've got the developers, the sites and the main contractors, who are then employing their Tier 1 and Tier 2, the material suppliers, and then eventually a huge number of vehicle operators. Those operators will be working for multiple clients. So the more we can get to that client level and influence them, the more operators we're going to reach in terms of the safety equipment, driver training and quality operation. So really, just to summarise all of that, it's really been about the power of procurement and influencing that supply chain. So let's use our contracts to ensure that there are clauses about managing work-related road risk that we can push down throughout that supply chain, and also have suppliers communicate back up to make sure that we're only employing the safest contractors and operators in the city. Oh, and finally, sorry, beg your pardon, there was one other thing that I really wanted to mention as well on this section, was about having a branding and identity for CLOCS. So whilst this has been something that Transport for London has commissioned, in order for the industry to take ownership and address that kind of cultural imbalance, it had to be something that they felt they owned. You know, they're sitting in these working groups, they're giving a lot of time. What are they giving time to? So quite early on in the programme, it was suggested at a group that we gave it branding and identity, and within, I think it was about 8 weeks, we commissioned and had and set up this branding. So it's something that can be applied not just in London, but across the rest of the UK as well. And now there definitely is time for questions.
Wonderful, fantastic presentation thus far. So our first question here, we've got a one here from Mark. Has there been any analysis identifying the risks to people working in the road corridor as vulnerable road users?
Yes, there has been, and this is something that has been is already managed quite well, and it's one of the key things around this safety and balance. So for those people who are working within the road, they are covered by the Health and Safety and Work Act, which is managed by the Health and Safety Executive. So as if you're working in the road environment, there are a huge number of controls, processes, training, and compulsory things that people have to do in order to be able to do that. And then that is something that is managed reasonably well. It's still a risky job, but there is a legal and policy framework to govern that, but there isn't something of the same magnitude in law for look at vulnerable road users, like members of the public who are not working.
Thank you. We've got one here from Royce, which it comes in 2 parts. What work was completed to look at the wider hazards outside of the heavy vehicles in the fatalities, injuries and near misses involving vulnerable road users, and what was considered and done to change the behaviours of the vulnerable road users, such as infrastructure and education?
Okay, so we publish our road safety figures quarterly now in London, and we have a team of people who are always looking at those to see and map the trends and see what's happening. So there is a huge programme of work across looking at kind of the different issues. So for example, we know that there are a number of issues around junctions, not just involving the heavy goods vehicles but other areas. So we have got a Better Junctions programme which is looking to improve those. We have a very large-scale infrastructure programme for the delivery of segregated infrastructure for cyclists where that is possible. So there's a programme of kind of the infrastructure measures, but that's also complemented by softer measures through communication campaigns campaigns, for example, warning of a vehicle blind spot, warning of being aware of car doors opening, which is another area that's sort of affected cyclists, around people's use of mobile phones. So we have targeted campaigns related to specific issues that have been flagged within the data, and there is a comprehensive road safety programme detailed in Transport for London's Road Safety Action Plan that details them, gives you more information about what those are.
And how effective have you been in actually influencing the vehicle manufacturers into addressing some of the issues with regards to the blind spots?
We have been, well, far more influential than we thought we would be, and actually I think this is one of the key successes of CLOCS, which has led to it having its own programme of activity through the Safer Trucks programme. And I think sort of 3 years ago, the manufacturers actually almost wouldn't talk to us at all. We then eventually managed to get a meeting with them where they said, there's not really much we can do about this. And after the operator delegation I mentioned earlier, we actually discovered there was quite a lot the manufacturers could do. And there's a very specific example with Mercedes-Benz, where I mentioned that refuse cab, which is basically really used for municipal waste. And we said, could you put a tipper body on that, and could it carry a 20-ton payload, which is what was, the industry were demanding. And the initial answer was, no, we don't think we can do that. It will be too expensive. There's no demand for it. We're not sure we could engineer it. But with the operator delegation suggesting, well, if you did do one, somebody would buy it and operate it, let's trial it. They actually did go away and do that. And not only did they look at a tipper, they also looked at a mixer body, they looked at skip loaders, they've looked at other distribution cabs, and within 18 months they've launched it, and they have now sold well over 50 of those vehicles, despite them having some sort of premium. And the other thing I just want to mention about that is we thought we were probably going to get 1 or 2 demonstration vehicles for London, and we now have over 50 of them. But I was at a show last week in Germany, the International Automobile Show for commercial vehicles, and they are now looking at selling those to a European market, which 2 years ago they weren't even going to look at the vehicle at all. So there has been a real shift with the manufacturers, not just Mercedes-Benz, but that's a particular example where we've seen a lot of success.
Great. Another question here from Blair. The code covers side underrun protection. What's your experience in this, and have you found it to be effective? Similarly, are you able to provide more details about route selection, how this works?
So with regard to the side underrun protection, that's something that, in fact, nearly most vehicles have to have fitted anyway under law, apart from the construction which have been previously exempt because they are classified as off-road vehicles. So there was, we don't believe off-road vehicles really should be operating in a city environment. They may be doing some off-road work either side, but they spend the majority of the time on road, which is one of the reasons why side underrun protection is a requirement in the standard. What has also happened in London though is because side underrun protection is governed by a law, and we have been able to introduce a local regulation to close that exemption for a number of vehicles. And the reason I mention this is because in terms of the evidence, this was all looked into by the Department for Transport in the UK, who actually did analysis of side underrun protection and its benefits in order to bring it into to regulation. So there is some research around that available at a national level as well as in London. So that's sort of the first question. Could you just repeat the second part of the question, Jerome?
Certainly. The second part was, similarly, are you able to provide more details about route selection and how this works?
Okay, so this is something that we have been working on for some time, but at one point we had a kind of an app that was trying to, or an online tool that was going to help people to choose their routes, and we're still doing some development around that. A lot of it though really is analysing those areas of risk, looking at peak flows of cyclists and pedestrians, for example, looking at those routes that are most suited for lorries where they would have the infrastructure provision such as segregated cycle lanes. And we're working through a programme of trying to coordinate, for example, the construction sector, different construction sites, so that there is a local area routing and traffic management plan for an area rather than just for a specific site, so that people are working together to ensure they're using the best routes to avoid those areas of conflict, or where they do have to use them, using the most appropriate roads. So that's kind of an ongoing piece of work there. But there has been some quite good examples of where, by looking at this in more detail and looking at those kind of risky manoeuvres, which has included taking cycling groups out with the developers and contractors so that they can review the routes that they're using. We've managed to pick things, for example, avoiding the left turn, which is that risky manoeuvre, and taking them at a different route. So there's a kind of a strategic level, but also things that are happening on the ground with sort of cyclists and pedestrians actually reviewing the routing, access and egress to sites.
Do you find also that heavy vehicle operators have a chance to feed back into you around areas they might pick up that are problematic or high risk, which you may have overlooked?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, through our own CLOCS working groups, we offer that opportunity for discussion, but we have other programs as well, such as FORS, which is the Fleet Operator Recognition Scheme, and they have a dedicated helpline, etc. And there's quite a few mechanisms for and opportunities for operators to feed back directly to our team, who will deal with those inquiries and questions.
Fantastic. And got a good question here from Kathy. How do businesses manage the cycling experience part of driver training, and how do they manage the risk of inexperienced cyclists on roads as part of workplace training?
Very good question. We have been running driver training now in London. It's called the Safe Urban Driver Training course for some years, and the half of the day it's aligned to the Certificate of Professional Competence, which all drivers need to have in order to hold a heavy goods vehicle licence. We've made sure it meets that requirement to help encourage people to do it. It spends half a day in a classroom learning about the kind of theory about understanding why urban environments kind of are designed how they are, why they're changing, why they're seeing more vulnerable road users on the road, and more focus on urban realm to give them that context. And then they spend half the day out on the bike. Now, the bike training is delivered by qualified cycle trainers who all work to the national standard that the UK has here, called Bikeability training. And Bikeability training is graded levels 1, 2 and 3. So where we might have some drivers who are inexperienced at cycling, or other people in the workplace, they would start at that Bikeability level 1, and that is really where it focuses. So it's all aligned with proven training that is used in schools all the way through to adulthood, to make sure that it is something that's progressive and people aren't put in a situation that adds further risk to them. And clearly there has been assessments about the kind of equipment people need, and the use of cycle helmets and high visibility, and that also has helped with the kind of debate around cycle safety generally. So yeah, it's managed by a national standard.
I think that nearly answers Dave's question, which just came through, is there a requirement for cyclists to wear high visibility clothing?
It's not a requirement, it's something we advise to be seen, so it's advisory rather than compulsory, and we particularly have previously run campaigns in the winter in order to highlight that to people, as well as reminders around the legal obligation that there is for lights on the bikes, but the visibility clothing is advisory.
And from an organisation's perspective, you mentioned how the technology comes into play for certain vehicles. Do you find feedback from them with regards to if drivers move from one vehicle to another and something the technology isn't in the truck? Is that much of an issue?
We commissioned some research a few years ago now to understand drivers' attitudes to technology, and one thing that did show was where an operator had spent time with the driver kind of choosing the right equipment, they were more accepting of it. But if they'd had equipment in, there was a bit of resistance, particularly around kind of older drivers to some of the equipment. When they moved vehicles, however, and it wasn't in there anymore, people were kind of a little bit concerned because they had got used to having something there. So there is some evidence from that market research that suggests that people do like it, but it also suggests that it pays for operators to work with their drivers to make sure that the right equipment is being fitted and used.
Fantastic. Just before we move on, I've got another question from Kathy just shot through. I really like the thought that has been put into the cycling training for drivers. Is more information available online?
Absolutely. In fact, we've got an entire pack of the training that we could send a link to, and you could see all the objectives and the materials that are produced for the drivers as well.
Wonderful. Make sure that's circulated to everyone.
Awesome. And just to remind our audience who've been very engaging and we're really enjoying the questions, that the best way to get your question noticed is to type it into the questions box. Thank you very much. We're ready to move on.
Thank you. Yeah, so what has CLOCS actually achieved since it started back in 2013? So there's constantly a high level of output and progress going on as the programme moves forward, but a lot of this work is sort of behind the scenes. We're sort of beavering away in the background, but it's important to us that we keep industry engaged and in touch with what we're actually working on, what we're doing, and especially including those that might not be directly engaged in those regular working groups that we hold. So we've hosted regular CLOCS progress events. So I mentioned the first inaugural event we held, but since then we've held regular events. They started off every 6 months, but as the sort of scale of those events, it's become an annual event now. And our next event is scheduled for March 2017. And these are really a look back in the past year of what we've done, what we've achieved, the outputs, and also look forward to what we want to work towards in the future. And we now see regularly over 650 delegates at these events. They feature a conference session with speakers from across the industry, and panel sessions, Q&A, a chance for people to have their say. And in parallel to this, we run an exhibition with some of the safer trucks that are out there, and also the safety equipment that can be fitted to the existing trucks, really the sort of tangible outputs of CLOCS. And these events are really crucial to us in sort of showcasing what can be done and also what has been done. And just looking at some of the statistics that we pulled together, I think it's fair to say that CLOCS is making an impact. So over 20,000 trucks have now been fitted with enhanced safety features, and over 30,000 drivers, that's a little bit out of date now, 30,000 drivers have undertaken safe urban driving training that Hannah was just talking about. There's now over 250 higher vision trucks on the roads. These are the vehicles with the increased glass, the lower cab, bigger windscreen. And that's equates to approximately around about £5 million worth of industry investment, which I believe is around about 9 million Australian dollars. We also now have over 320 CLOCS champions. So these are organisations that have actually signed up and committed to adhere to the requirements of the CLOCS standard, actually signed a memorandum of understanding. And crucially, over 40 of those are clients. So those are the organisations implementing CLOCS down their supply chain, as Hannah discussed earlier, with that pyramid of sort of influence. And as you can see from the map on the right-hand side, it's awareness of the programme has really increased just in 2 years, and not just in London where we're based, but nationally, which is something we're really working to roll CLOCS out as a national standard and national programme. We've actually been recognised for the progress we've made as well. So back in December last year, we were awarded the Prince Michael International Road Safety Award, and subsequently we were selected as the Premier Award winner of those awards. So the programme was praised for the way that private and public sector organisations have really worked together to address the challenges of vulnerable road user safety. And it was really held up as a good example of successful cooperation. And from our own experience and perspective, I don't think we feel that we would have been able to sort of make the waves that we had without the weight of industry behind us as well. So it was really nice to actually be recognised for that.
Okay, so I just want to really finish a little bit here about what our vision is for the project in the future. I think one of the things that we need to touch upon here is that the relative risk with all of this that's going on. There's been a huge amount of investment by industry, which Vicky has just gone through, how much of a kind of reach we've had really in terms of the private sector coming to the table to tackle this issue. The relative risk of being involved in a collision while cycling in London has fallen. We have got an increase in construction activity, we have an increase in cycling, but we're not seeing an increase in the absolute numbers of people being involved. Though clearly it's very difficult, and I'm sure those that are tuned in as well have their own challenges of being able to prove exactly one measure against another, but it is certainly something that we're seeing the relative risk falling. So in terms of where we want to get to in the future then, we talked about these health and safety cultures on site, and these here are all logos, strap lines from construction industry, principal contractors and projects. Now all of them are about safety, they're about Vision Zero, about Target Zero, about making sure that nobody involved working within their project are going to be harmed in the course of work. And now, whilst that's fantastic, it's a great aspiration, but really, why is the work-related road risk, that's put there through the activity of their supply chain not currently being considered necessarily in the same way? So I guess the message is quite simple in terms of what our vision is that that is treated in the same way, and that there is a similar approach to eradicating killed and seriously injured vulnerable road users involving construction vehicles. So that's all we really wanted to say about the CLOCS story, and now there is some time for some more questions.
Fantastic, thank you very much. So our first sort of question here, I guess, is obviously goes back to drawing on, you mentioned lively debate. These sort of events happen. Have you seen a sort of a bridging in attitudes between the heavy vehicles, the cyclists, the pedestrians, the police? Have these sort of groups come together more and have a stronger dialogue?
Yes, they do. We've noticed a really big shift from back, I sort of mentioned, when 2008, 2009, all the way up. We had quite a difficult relationship with particularly the cycling lobby groups, and it was quite difficult to have a kind of constructive conversation at that time. There was a lot of anger, a lot of resistance, and actually over the last few years, I think partly by involving those groups within the working group so they can see and listen and hear to how industry are tackling this, that has really helped. And we are actually now at a point, because of that collaborative approach to the development of the solutions, that the cycling groups, the pedestrian groups are now looking at CLOCS and some of the initiatives within that and asking for them. So they have now been asking the mayor's representatives to roll this out further, and we're seeing some local campaigning going on in other cities across the UK. So it's fantastic for us to now see recognition for the sorts of schemes we're developing, whereas previously nothing we were doing what they wanted. So yeah, we are pleased to have seen that shift.
Fantastic. There must be quite an investment that you've seen in that Transport for London put in developing this. What do you think the investment's been from the industry side in time? Has that sort of outweighed probably your own investment?
Absolutely, and Vicky had pulled together a figure. We have actually looked at the amount of time that's spent on the working groups. I'm thinking, we'll just hold on one moment, we're just going to check our notes here, because you think we've got sort of 50 to 60 people sat there every couple of months coming to the table at a senior decision-making level. It's hugely valuable, and it's been over 2,200 industry hours dedicated to those working groups and the project since it started, and we haven't seen any drop-off in commitment despite this still been going on for 3 years, which is fantastic.
Wow. So it really shows you that industry is really pulling its weight in this. So I've got a question here. Can you provide some more details, please, on who hosts the Code of Practice and where the issues in finding a host, and do you have any advice regarding this issue?
So I think, well, we obviously sort of facilitate the creation of the standard, but as I said earlier, it's really an industry-led approach, and the sort of responsibility, I suppose, in a way, lies with the clients to put it into their contracts and ensure that people are adhering to those standards. But we, in terms of actually running and owning that standard, we hold every 2 years we are committed to updating and revising that in consultation with industry directly. So it's really sort of hosted and governed by industry itself.
Question here. So with regards to the power of contracts, what sort of impact does that have on the average age and the condition of the vehicle that operates in this sector within the City of London?
It's a good question. It's something we have seen that generally you see a kind of newer vehicle fleet than you might see elsewhere, so it has definitely influenced people's purchasing decisions in terms of potentially renewing their fleets quicker. And part of that has been through this sort of safety contracts. Part of it's also been through the amount of major projects that we have running in London. And just looking forward to, there's a huge project called Thames Tideway that's about to come on board, which is replacing all of our Victorian sewer systems, and they are doing a lot of work around this direct vision and visibility of the lorries, which means because it's going to be a project that's going to be running for in excess of sort of 8 to 10 years in London, we're really able to influence the new generation of vehicles to make sure they are the safest possible through that project. So we know that they are going to be mandating a certain safety standard around direct visibility, which is really going to see a change in the types of vehicles. Added to that, just it's something else that falls in my area, so it's just worth mentioning, is we are now consulting on proposals for an ultra-low emission zone in order to be able to tackle some of the air quality challenges we have in London. So that too is also going to reduce the age of the fleet in London, because people are going to have to purchase vehicles that are not only safer but they are also cleaner, and they need to have done that by 2020. So we're going to see quite a new fleet in the capital soon.
Do you see this flowing over into other sort of sectors? So obviously you focus on construction. I was wondering about utilities, for example, or those sort of areas.
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely no reason why the requirements in the CLOCS standards can't be translated across to other sectors. We've obviously focused on construction because it's disproportionately represented, but TfL themselves have work-related road risk clauses in our contracts, and those are exactly the same as the CLOCS requirements, but obviously any supplier that is working with the TfL, so that's not just limited to construction, that's anyone delivering to a TfL site. So it's easily translatable, and we've sort of demonstrated that it can be done. For the time being, we've focused on construction, but yeah, no reason it can't be across other sectors as well.
We've got a great question here from Steve. How is the program raising pedestrian awareness of the issues of interacting with heavy goods vehicles?
Again, a very good question. It's something that we haven't specifically focused on from our side, because a lot of the work here has been around what industry can do. We do work closely with our road safety team here at TfL, who are looking into more detail about how to raise awareness in that way. And one of the key things we have recently developed has been a film to demonstrate the differences in the blind spots between like large-scale heavy goods vehicles and those with a lower entry cab, and it's really quite stark, and that's been filmed from the perspective of a cyclist, a pedestrian and a lorry driver, so we can see everybody's experience of that vehicle. And we also run, in partnership with the police, a programme called Exchanging Places, where people are invited to sit in the cab of a lorry physically and understand how much you can or really fundamentally cannot see from that cab as a driver. And we've had nearly 30,000 people go through that programme, so equivalent to what we've had from the driver side with the on-bike training. But I think it's pretty fair to say there is more work to do about raising awareness, and also how we go about doing that to make sure that it's informing people and it's not in any way suggesting that people are at fault, because this is all about everybody taking responsibility for what they can do to avoid it, and we do need to be careful in how we position that messaging.
Has there been an outcry at all for those organisations that can't meet the code?
We've had a few people say outcry. There's been people who've been a bit resistant at first, and they maybe not have liked it, but we've got such good still evidence now, really, that any operator of any size is able to meet this and still function and win business and remain in business, and if anything, win more business, because they're able to work for those clients that require this code. So whilst there was a concern initially about how this might affect particularly smaller operators or owner drivers, the fact that we have got representatives from all fleet sizes able to do this, and we're able to kind of push back on those questions now and say actually it is possible. And I think one of the key messages from us as well has been this is an investment, it's not a cost. If you're investing into driver training, being a quality operator, putting the safety equipment on, you should actually be seeing a return on that in the longer term future. You will have a reduction in collisions. We've seen reductions in insurance premiums. You know, you are more likely to win work. You're going to be more efficient, for example, on how you manage your fuel because your drivers are driving better in the urban environment. So yeah, we've been not as much outcry as we thought.
And that's a great one to sort of close off, and Hannah, I think that's a fantastic message to finish it off with.
Awesome. And thank you so much, Hannah and Vicky, for getting up early and sharing your awesome work with us. And thank you, Jerome. And the audience has been amazing with their great questions. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. We'd love to hear your feedback via the survey that will launch shortly. We hope that you'll join us again for future webinars.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.